Well, thank you all for joining us during this breakout session. I'm excited to have you. For those of you that are just joining the summit and we're not here for the guest panel, my name is Jennifer Saenz and I'm one of the senior directors here at E3 Alliance. And I'm so excited to be here with you to share some of the data around post-secondary education when it comes to enrollment, persistence, and completion. But more excited to share with you our three guest panelists who will engage in some of the work that they've been focused on, mostly this pandemic year, but even beyond the pandemic, to really improve student outcomes as they transition into higher ed and go into the workforce. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know we're running a little late. But this breakout session is focused on post-secondary success, right? It's one of the key areas that E3 looks at from a data perspective, but also the initiatives that we focus on. We're very concerned about students' outcomes, and we're focused on that cradle to career. And we know that one of the largest transitions in a student's life is from high school into post-secondary. When we refer to post-secondary, we're thinking about it from the perspective of a credential, a 2-year associate degree or a 4-year bachelor's degree. So really thinking about post-secondary in that space. One of the things I'd like for us to do is just to start and chat. This is a smaller group. And so we're definitely gonna have more opportunity to talk and chat, but also to unmute ourselves. Chat feature, if you could respond to the following. What do these things have in common? Zip code, income level, race, ethnicity, and gender. Just in chat, when you think of those terms, what do you see that they might have in common?
Yeah, do you want anybody to start?
Yeah, you can either share out loud if you'd like, or you can put it in chat, whichever is easier.
Oh, okay. Do you want us to put in chat?
Sure, if you don't mind, or you can go ahead and share it since you're already unmuted.
Okay, so I probably will just share with you verbally. These things have a lot in common, because if you look at our public school system is so much our neighborhood. And our zip codes, income level, race, ethnicity, gender. Gender, of course, can be, gender is gender, it can be anything, right? So, but the data has definitely shown that, our income level is affecting our student learning. And income level is also, assimilated many times. It's, exceptions are always there. I mean, one student can be going to another school, can be bused to another school due to different reasons. But this is something in common is that we do see these things and we do see lower learning among students.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, when we look at chat, it's very consistent with what you're saying, factors that impact access to educational opportunities, predictors of educational economic future and success, right? So these are definitely those things that really tie a student's outcomes based on these things, right? And I think what I want you to hear from this presentation today as we look at data and as we engage in conversation is this is what we're trying to transition from, right? When we talk about systems change, we believe that we can do a lot of little things that will improve outcomes for a certain group of students or certain students at that given time. But until we really think about the education system as a whole and really think about what are some of those evidence best practices that we need to change within the system, then in order to shift away from, when you see these 4 things, you don't think of students' educational outcomes or opportunity. So let's look at some of these session objectives for today. What we really want to get is an understanding of what the data tells us about post-secondary success. I'm going to share some of the E3 data with that we've been collecting and analyzing over many years, but most recently I'll show the latest data. understand how to drive action to ensure all students reach post-secondary success. So take this data and drive action from it, right? That's the focus. It's one thing, we can collect all the data, we can analyze it, we can interpret it, we can make tons of assumptions, but unless we're actually acting on it, then we're not moving and positioning anything in the education system. And then I want to learn from other advocates on initiatives they have in place to help students reach that post-secondary success. There's a lot of great initiatives and organizations in the Central Texas area that are working with our students. We heard it from the guest panel. We had a student from Con Mi Madre. We had a student from My Brother's Keeper who were able to share that that was one of their best resources that really allowed them to be successful in achieving this academic year, even given a pandemic. And so I want to hear from other initiatives. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. As we navigate through this conversation, the essential question I want us to focus on that I'm going to highlight here and that I'll bring back at the end for us to reflect on is what can you do in your role to accelerate change using an inclusive approach? So as we're engaging and looking at the data, as we're hearing from our other initiatives about the work that they've been doing to improve student outcomes through post-secondary, to and through post-secondary, really think about your particular role, the organization or institution that you work with, and how in your role can you accelerate this type of change using that inclusive approach, right? Because I think it's definitely not new. Unfortunately, we heard it in the Zoom bomb, right? But we know that there is not equity within the education system. There is a lot of racial inequities within our education system that are providing barriers and obstacles for groups of students to not be successful or just kind of holding them back. And so really thinking about that inclusive approach as we do this work and move forward. So just be thinking about that. So as most of you know that have been part of E3 or engaged and work with us or other initiatives, we really leverage data towards action. And so we really use data to understand and build that knowledge and understanding of what is going on within education from cradle to career. We look at the data not just in that given time for that certain group of students at that certain grade level, that certain race and identity or gender, but we're looking at it longitudinally as well, really trying to understand what are those patterns and trends that we're seeing throughout the education pipeline that are, one, impacting our students in a positive way and allowing them to meet their outcomes and the goals that they've set for themselves, but also what are those problems of practice that we're identifying throughout the data and our knowledge and our learning to then drive us to action, right? That determines what initiatives, what best practices do we have to put in place, what systems do we have to change so that our students reach the outcomes that they are seeking. And so all of the data that we collect and analyze is always focused on this, collecting the data to gain the knowledge to drive action. So when we look at post-secondary data trends, I'm going to start with thinking about it from the perspective of enrollment, right? What have we seen in enrollment over the last years and up until date? The most recent enrollment data that we will have, you will see, is 2019 data. We get our data from the Educational Resource Center. It's also shared with us sometimes from Texas Education Agency, the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, or our district and institution partners. But it's always sometimes lagged. This is 2019, and what it's showing you is where some of our students in the Central Texas region mostly went, right? And so you'll see the biggest chunk of our students really went to kind of the University of Texas at Austin or Austin Community College, with Texas State getting a large percent as well, not as big, but a large percent. Very smaller percentage to our other institutions, our private institutions, or our smaller public institutions. What we do know, which is interesting, and especially true across the state and the nation, but we've seen it in Central Texas, that only 80% of our students in the Central Texas region attend a college within 13-mile radius of their home. So I want to think about that, right? Because I worked as an educator, as an administrator in the K-12 space for a long time, and then transitioned into higher ed for 9 years prior to joining E3. And oftentimes I heard from students and parents, well, we can't take this course because my son or my daughter wants to go out of state, right? Or they want to go as far away as possible. But the reality is, and what the data shows us, is our students don't go that far from their home. They really do attend school very close to their home. In this case, 80% within 13 miles. So thinking about it from that perspective of the incredible institutions we have here in Central Texas, where are these students going if they're not coming to our institutions, even if we're within that 13 miles? When we look at enrollment from the perspective of low income and non-low income, which we like to do often because it does highlight some of those patterns or trends, what you're going to see if you look, this chart is showing us from 2009 to 2019. What you'll notice is that our trend line is going down, right? Even though if you looked at our high school data, what you're going to see in our high school data is the graduation rates of our high school students has increased over time from 2009 to 2019, but we're not seeing that same pattern for our students who are transitioning into post-secondary. In fact, we're seeing fewer students transition into post-secondary within that first year after high school than we have in the past. So really trying to understand why this shift in students attending post-secondary, right? There's a lot of assumptions that can be made, but what we want to do, or what we try to do, is really get into the perspective of listening to our institutions, listening to our students and our families, and listening to our juniors and seniors in high school, and looking at and understanding what is it, why are they not in that transitional period? The interesting thing in this pandemic year, typically in prior years during a pandemic or something of magnitude, we have seen enrollment go up in higher ed because people are going back to upskill or transition to a new field because of this shift in the economy or whatever's happening. And this is the first time in this particular pandemic we did not see that happen. So just really interesting and understanding to think about from that perspective. When we take that enrollment data, and this is looking at 2019 again, and we look at it, we refer to this as our 16-way split. And so we're looking at it from non-low income up at the top in the reddish pink, if you will, and then our low income students, which are in the greenish color. You're going to see that it's broken down female on the top and male, or not at the very top, in between each group. And then by our race and ethnicity, our Black, Hispanic, white, Asian, in that order for each of those areas. I think what you'll identify is that our students of color have they lag behind in enrollment into higher post-secondary, and more so for our low income students. But when looking at this particular data chart, what is something that probably sticks out the most, or what might stick out the most to you? Male student enrollment. Thank you, Chelsea. Yes, look at our male student enrollment. So when we look at this is an area that we would definitely hone in on, magnify into. Why are our male students not enrolling at the same rate or higher rate than any other student? You will also notice that our male students, when we look at our Black, Hispanic, and white students, seem to have the much lower enrollment rate than our Asian male students. And so trying to understand why are our male students not transitioning into post-secondary at the rate that our other students are doing. We continue to see the same pattern each year. This has not changed from one year to the next. We continue to hone in on our low income students, but also mostly our male students. Now, this particular enrollment chart, again, is looking at low income and non-low income. But what you're seeing is a percent of Central high school grads enrolled in Texas higher education institutions within 1 year of graduation. At our 2-year, our 4-year public, and our 4-year private. So when we look at this, what we see is our low income students have higher percent that are going in their first year to our 2-year institutions. And then our non-low income students, we have a higher percent that are going within that first year to our 4-year public institutions, a smaller percent into our 4-year privates for those students that are in Central Texas. So I just kind of want to open it up for discussion, and we can have this discussion in chat if you feel more comfortable, if you want to unmute and share. Like I said, this is a smaller group and we'd love to hear voices as well. But who is most negatively impacted from the data that we just shared around enrollment in the 2019 school year?
I feel like we are all negatively impacted as a community without that diversity, without the balance, male and female, and all of those things going together as a community. We're struggling. We have that diversity and inclusion and acceptance and overall productivity in the community.
So I would say that the missing that is data, the data that is missing is why. Why do they make these choices? You can't get remedies until you understand the why.
I would agree. I think another missing data point is talking to those male students who have the lower enrollment rates. Some of the things I hear from my program is oftentimes our male students are provided and incentivized towards other options, military enlistment, going straight into the workforce. And so because a lot of those things are structured in such a way of this is so much more of an option for you versus others, I think that has an impact, but again, that's anecdotal. I feel like having more robust research into that topic, I think would really help to fill in that gap.
Curious about students' perceived readiness for college. So based on a TSI test or something else. So like wondering what that, like if they feel like I'm not college ready, I can't hack, like they've gotten messages, you know, in data or otherwise that they wouldn't be successful, so they just aren't going. So curious about like the breakdown of college ready versus not, and the students who go to enroll and students who don't.
I really like what Chelsea was saying, and I think I'm wondering what decisions did the students who are not choosing 2- and 4-year universities, where did they go? Did they choose trade schools, and are those included in the 2-year school options, or is trade school something separate?
That's a great question. And so in our data, 2-year can also represent, as long as it's a certified trade school, then it is included in that. If they're not certified by the state, then they will not be included. So it does depend on where they're going.
I think it would be important to also, and this might touch on what Chelsea was saying, is look at advisors that they had. Were, you know, especially during COVID, I mean, counselors are always overwhelmed. We know what the rates are and how many per student. But I'm wondering also if that could be an effect. Who was advising them, you know, about college? And Chelsea, that can go into what you were saying about the options given to them. Were they even given the choice? Oh, you could go to college, you know? So I think advising also might be an impact, but we can't, you know that from this data.
I think, Carol, that's a great point, because that is one of the most important things and very imperative in a student's life when the student is, you know, starting, especially from middle school onwards. I think advising is important from kindergarten onwards, but from middle school onwards, it is extremely imperative. Also, from this data, I'm also not able to figure out if there are some students who are trying to make some money after high school to enter college. So for a couple of years, they go in the workforce, and because it's the cost is the number one reason for students not entering post-secondary education. And I will tell you, not to take too much of everyone's time, but I had my undergraduate degree in India. And so my husband and I just came here for our graduate school only. We were not familiar with undergraduate education in over here. And as I was progressing, as we knew that as foreign students, we have to pay a lot of money, and which is fine. We were foreign students. But then slowly I came to know that how much it costs to go to college. And oh my goodness, I mean, we took our undergraduate degrees for free compared to that. And with great faculty, great resources, everything was available to us. So number one reason is cost. And I wonder how many students are actually entering workforce to make money and then go to college. It's not that they don't want to, or they are thinking that, it is not going to be beneficial, but they don't have the resources.
I think that's important, especially this last academic year with COVID. We heard a lot of stories about students wanted to take a gap year, especially regarding costs, because they were going back, they were entering college or the university, but online. They weren't going to, so there was this confusion as to why am I paying all this money and I'm not getting the full experience of what my 4-year or 2-year education is going to be. So taking a gap year was a big thing, I think, that I heard this past academic year.
I wanted to point out that with the male and female discrepancy is that in the past, decades, we have been trying so hard as a nation to close the gap between males and females. And so much money has been invested in all these girl programs that has accelerated really girls' aptitude. And I have boy and girl twins, and to find things for my daughter is very easy, but to find things for my boy is very hard. There is no programs for boys, and he doesn't want to go to an all girls club, like if they have all of these STEM programs for girls, and they are so cool. And they teach awesome things that my daughter is learning, but he doesn't want to go to that. He's a boy and he wants to be with other boys. But there is hard. It's very, very hard to find things for boys. And regarding education for free, my husband was a Fulbright scholar in Spain. In Spain, higher education is free. And I think there is a danger, because I think in India, only the students that are very dedicated will get into that college and get to that free education. But for example, in Spain, where everyone gets free education, the students really don't value it. They don't go to class. They just feel entitled, kind of like, give me my degree because I'm coming here and there here to these classes for 4 years, and now I just deserve my degree. So I think sometimes when we get free things, it's kind of like, it can be dangerous. I'm not opposed to free things. I love free things, but there can be a danger with just not having any cost. And on the other hand, it is very expensive, and it is a challenge for parents and students to put the kids through college. So I guess it should be a balance in there.
Yeah, well, thank you all for sharing. That was really impactful.
Jennifer, I had one more thing that, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Undiagnosed or misdiagnosed disabilities or mental health issues, especially for the boys. We're raised to kind of overcome the issue and keep going. And had a personal experience with that in terms with my son. They wanted to try to put a label of him being oppositional defiant. And everybody knows kind of the image that paints for students, counselors, and come to find out he was just bored in class because the teacher wasn't engaging him. But had they been able to put that label on him, that could have ultimately changed the trajectory of kind of his academic experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's so important. And I think of that from the perspective of what is missing from this data. I mean, I overwhelmingly heard and 100% agree is the student voice, right? The qualitative component of this data of what are our students saying. But I also think about looking not just at one unit of data, right? That's why it's so important to say what other factors might be impacting this and what should we be looking at. And so, sorry, I can't see people, so I don't know who just spoke, but it's kind of aligned. We just released our discipline data. And when we look at our discipline data, our Black male students are 4 times more likely to receive a discipline referral as early as elementary for some of the same infractions that other students do that do not receive discipline referrals. And there are direct correlations, as you know, if you've studied or been engaged in any of the school to prison pipeline. When we think about education, but some ones that are early too, the mindset, right? What are we telling our students? What are we telling them from the perspective of what they're capable of doing? So I think that data is missing as well, that we can't just look at higher ed data on its own. We have to look across a lot of data to tell the full story of our students' educational pathway and where it leads them. So thank you for that discussion. I want to quickly go to persistence. Yes.
Jennifer, can I just add one thing?
Absolutely.
When we're looking at the students who are in greatest need, we have to ask, how are we engaging them when we have them in high school to match them up with the correct post-secondary credential that sets their passion on fire and allows them to thrive within our society. And as we look at the CTE pathways that are now opening, I think that's one of the ways that we could potentially gain some ground the students who are missing that connection.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I know one of our guest panelists, Isaac, will be talking a lot about the Make It movement, which is directly correlated to how do we identify our students' passions and connect them earlier to those CTE pathways that are in our high schools that provide such great opportunity for them to really explore and understand, like, yes, this is what I love and I'm really good at it and I can continue it. So thank you for sharing that. These are persistence. You're going to notice our data year shifts. We're still collecting persistence and completion for the 2019 school year. So our latest data is reflecting 2017. But like what we've seen, the pattern of our trend lines continue to go down. So we'll probably see that in our 2019 data as well. But persistence is so important, right? When we think about getting students in is one thing, but having them persist from fall to spring in their freshman year is extremely crucial, but also from that first year to second year, because we know if they persist in that second year, we're doubling their chances of completing, whether they're in that 2-year trade, 2-year or 4-year institution. So you're going to see very similar data trends around persistence for our different students. Being where our students are persisting and falling in these data trends. We'll also did this in a 16-way split where you can see it again by our non-low income students and our low income students. And again, I really highlighting that it's again our male students that are Black, our Hispanic, and our white male students that we are seeing persist at the lowest rate that any other student does. So consistent there and persistence. When we look at persistence from 2 to 4 year, so what you're seeing is in that 2 year, 66% of the students that enrolled in that 2 year persisted to the second year. 7% of those students persisted and enrolled and transferred to a four-year institution, and 27% did not enroll in a 2 or 4 year that second year. When we look at four-year institution, what you're seeing is 10% of the students that were enrolled in a four-year institution are now persisted and are now enrolled in a 2-year institution, and 82% remained and persisted to that next year in that four-year institution that they were, and 8% did not re-enroll. And so we're definitely seeing higher percent of persistence in our four-year institutions than we are in our 2-year institutions for our students in the Central Texas area. When we look at percent of Central Texas high school grads that enrolled in Texas within 1 year, we are seeing a steady incline over time, but you're seeing that our low-income students are definitely persisting at a much lower rate than our non-low-income students. This data chart has a lot of information, and know that we will be sharing the slide deck, so you'll have access to all these data slides, and we also are recording, and so if you wanted to go back and listen to discussion, we'll be sharing these after the event today. But this is looking at percent of Central Texas high school graduates that enrolled in Texas higher ed within 1 year and completed. So now we're looking at completion. So it's really interesting to look over time, because you're starting to see some of these bars being removed, right? But our earliest data or latest data is 2011, where 27% of the students had completed by year 4. So we're definitely seeing a trend of, I think we got to a point in post-secondary where students were spending a lot of time in our institutions, more so than we wanted to take to complete. And we're seeing that not be the case as much. A lot of our students are getting out within that 4 to 6 period, depending on what institution they are enrolling in. And so we are seeing some advantages there. We're also looking at, this is looking at completion by our race and ethnicity within 6 years. Again, very similar patterns where we're seeing our Black students completing at much lower percentages than other students, and our Hispanic students right beside them. And so really trying to understand those completion patterns of our students from Black and Hispanic ethnicity and race. So I did want to look at just kind of in that data. I know I went through it a little quickly because I really want to get to our guest panel more than anything, and I'll be sharing the slides. But is there anything that really just stood out, just maybe a couple of people, something that you noticed or wondered, or this could be because of statement?
I think what we are noticing here is when students are not persisting in their second year. In fact, our data has also shown us that our students had a lack of belonging. When they go to any post-secondary institution, you know, one thing is the lack of readiness coming from high school, not 100% prepared, and not having that belongingness to their new institution. Sometimes, you know, it's very large university where, you know, your students are identified just by your ID cards. And, you know, there are so many, I mean, you have to thrive and you're not prepared, and, you know, they never had the time management. And so those kind of things really affect, and data also shows that social and emotional factors are actually very, very imperative to their academic success.
Absolutely.
I would add to this, I wonder how much finances continue to be an impacting factor for that 2-year, 3-year persistence, because to Sarita's point earlier, finances play a huge role in whether or not a student even decides to apply and enroll into a college. But so much financial aid options are good for the first semester, maybe the first year. And then all of a sudden the student is caught with themselves like, how am I even going to pay the second year? okay, should I even continue with it? Or if they make it to the second year, all of a sudden they're dealing with loans. They're having to reapply, and quite frankly, the gap in financial aid opportunities after they're no longer a first-time freshman gets so difficult for students to navigate. And I wonder how much that is playing a role in those, how long it takes them to even graduate.
Yeah, such a good point, Chelsea. And Canberra put in from Texas State that that's one of the main reasons that they get from students for not returning when they ask students who didn't return. That's the feedback they receive, even if they're getting financial aid, she puts. So that definitely is a huge barrier for our students. Thank you for sharing. You know, like I said, this is one data snapshot. It doesn't tell the whole narrative, right? But it definitely starts getting us to ask questions. And those questions should encourage us to dig deeper in the data and to want to look at other data that helps tell that story. But more importantly, help us to get that qualitative component, right? Really talk to our students. I think often we try to make assumptions for why certain groups of students aren't transitioning, aren't persisting, aren't completing. But until we actually hear it from those students, then we're not going to lead to real systems change, because we're not really putting the right initiatives or programs in place to eliminate those barriers. So what I'd like to do, because I think this is prime, especially when Chelsea talked about financial aid, for one of our guest panelists to really engage in that conversation. But I want to take us through our guest panel. So very excited today to have our three guest panelists with us, because I think they're going to bring some of that qualitative perspective to this conversation. So we have Ashley Alaniz-Moyer, who is the executive director with the Hispanic Scholarship Consortium, who is going to talk to us about emergency bridge grants, a particular initiative that they've been really focused on to support students as they are in college and transitioning from one year to the next so that they'll complete, and potentially other initiatives that they're working on that are really making an impact for our students' outcomes. Then we have Scott Del Rosi, who is the managing director in programs and student services with College Forward, who has a really incredible program that really starts working with students in the high school space to mentor them and be a resource as they navigate the college process, right? It's its own language, it's its own barrier sometimes, just understanding all of the different components to transition into post-secondary and what that means and what that looks like, and then being a resource for them when they're in that space. And then Dr. Isaac Torres, who is the account executive and leading some of the great work around the Make It movement. He'll be sharing with you. So at this time, I'm going to unshare my screen so we can see them. So welcome our guest panelists. Thank you so much for being here. I do have some questions for them, and if we have time, we'll open it up for you to ask any questions, kind of the same way I did it earlier. But if we're going to have each panelist be able to share in each of these questions. So I'm going to start with you, Ashley, if you don't mind. Please tell us a little bit about your initiative and how it came to fruition.
Yeah, so the Success for All Emergency Bridge Grant Program was born out of the Austin College Attainment Network, which is a network of local higher education institutions and community-based programs that are focused on college attainment. Through this network, we have a data sharing agreement in place with our higher ed institutions. And with some of the data that was collected from ACC, the network saw that students at ACC who dropped out because they had a hold on their account of $500 or less. In which for us now here at this end, we can go, wow, $500, that's such a small amount. But for these students, $500 is a huge amount that carries quite a burden. So from there, the Success for All Emergency Grant Program was born. It's a program that awards college students grants of $500 or less for an emergency they're experiencing that prevents them from completing the current semester or enrolling in the next semester. Students have to be participating in a community-based program that is a part of the Austin College Attainment Network. Some of the organizations that are part of this are Austin Partners in Education, Breakthrough Central Texas, Capital Idea, College Forward, Go Mi Madre, Foundation Communities College Hub, KIP Austin, the Hispanic Scholarship Consortium, and Peloton U. And how this program works is that caseworkers who are already working with these students, many have been working with these students since they were in elementary, middle school, are encouraging students to submit an online application with us. And then I jokingly refer to us and saying that we're kind of the wizard behind the curtain that makes the things happen and makes that scholarship check or that grant show up in their mailbox or places it in the hands of their caseworker. Pre-COVID, we were doing that. And the caseworker kind of handles all of that student communication. So it's really helpful with students because it's not another institution. It's not a new space that they're having to navigate. They're just relying on the caseworker advisors that are at these programs that they're already involved in.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I think, there's so many incredible resources in Central Texas that our students and oftentimes our communities and families or even our institutions don't know about. So this is really a good opportunity to kind of showcase some of this and really understand the impact that it has on our students. So thank you for sharing. Isaac, will you please share with us a bit about your initiative and how it came to fruition?
Sure. Thank you, Jen, and thank you everybody for having me today. I'm very happy to represent the Make It movement today. So really, in all of everything that we're talking about is so like fundamental. It's like at the heart of the Make It movement and what we're trying to do, specifically drive enrollment, drive high school completion for those targeted populations, and then a clean direct to post-secondary enrollment, again, for largely low-income males who are non-white, but then again, the low-income males also are not enrolling too. So there needs to be a specific kind of outreach to them. So the Make It movement really is trying to galvanize, trying to catalyze the region around ACC's kind of existing systems to really start thinking in terms of what does higher education mean? What does it mean for a student to go beyond high school? How can we redefine and kind of categorize what post-secondary really is? And I think we've all been doing that for some time. So the Make It movement in a way is responding to this historical conversation about who is ready for higher education, as it were, who is ready for work of the head and who is ready for work of the hand. The truth is what we found over time is that it's both and. Like how many of us here, I assume we all have college degrees and we work with our heads, sure, but we're working with our hands too. And in fact, there's this lifelong kind of learning that is involved in that. So part of what the Make It movement is trying to do is use marketing and use communications for kind of a power of good to really kind of reframe and re-educate ourselves along the way about what post-secondary means, what that exactly is, and how a student growing up here in Central Texas, going to a school here in Central Texas, can actually see, wow, there's a pathway out of this high school into a program that in fact is going to help me earn a credential, a certificate, a degree, whatever that pathway is, that leads to a real career, it leads to a real growth sector, a real growth industry here in the region. So in one aspect, we're responding to that historical conversation that is, that's central to that is like this conversation of racial justice and equity. How do we support, students who have historically been kept out? The second kind of reason why the Make It movement is here and what we're trying to do is because there have been statewide conversations about how can we fulfill a growing need within our workforce. How can we raise up homegrown talent to be prepared to fill these growing sectors? And we've failed to do that, not just here in Texas and in Central Texas, but collectively as a nation. We have not figured out a way to raise up homegrown talent, to specifically those who have historically been kept out, train them, get them credentials, get them certificates and degrees, and get them into careers where they're actually earning a living wage and moving toward a kind of economic mobility. The third piece of it is the reason why the Make It movement is here. It comes, in fact, from work from E3 and the deliberative dialogues work from a few years ago, wherein that intensive engagement with the community helped us to see there are in fact a few priorities that the community needs, and in fact the students we're trying to reach need. One, they need mentorship. They need human capital to help them to hold their hand across those transitions, high school to post-secondary, year 1 to year 2, completion to employment, et cetera. Two, they need to know which resources are available, how to access them, where are they, what are the funding opportunities, scholarship, employment, basic needs, what are the different things that are out there, and who's going to point a light on them so that me and my mom can in fact take the bus down to ACC and access those things. That was what they told us. They need mentors. They need to know which resources and where they are. And then the third thing they told us, they need a wide-reaching marketing and communications campaign that is really just blasting them everywhere they go, that they see, oh, there are in fact these pathways. There's these opportunities out of high school. I can see, in fact, there is a higher education for me. I can see my higher purpose. And in fact, I can make it, as it were. I can make it beyond high school into a pathway and have a quality of life. So that's the kind of large context of it. And it, you know, those conversations at the statewide level and locally with Susan, with E3 and all of the partners really inspired Roy Spence and GSD and them to really kind of craft this new brand. And it's called the Make It Movement. And there's, you know, physical structures that will be at ACC. It's centered around the community college system, but ideally it's the long-term goal is to change the perceptions of what post-secondary is and to get those historically kept out groups into post-secondary and onto a career pathway.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Isaac. And for those of you that were here at the guest panel of the students, one of the things we kept hearing over and over from our students was communication. And so I think you're right on point. There are so many things out there, but our students and families don't know what's available and they don't know how to access them. So having one space that is engaged in understanding what the needs of our students and families are through talking to them, through looking at data, and then providing those through this Make It movement is really incredible. So thank you for sharing. Scott, we'd love to hear from you a little bit about your initiative and how it came to fruition.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for having me. So I'm here representing College Forward, and at College Forward, we coach underserved, under-resourced students to achieve the benefits of higher education. We primarily work with 5,300 students from the Central Texas region. We work with them starting in their junior year of college, and we actually stick with them until they graduate from college. The initiative that I was going to talk about here today was our virtual coaching program that has really been born out of several different several different threads, but ultimately were brought together and born out of the pandemic over the summer. And so at College Forward, we have a summer bridge program where we pair our students up with a current college student that is an intern for College Forward. We pair them up with the college student to help them transition from high school until college. The interns are college students, and so it has kind of the double benefit of not only providing a resource to our rising freshmen, but we're also giving employment opportunities to our current college students and professional development opportunities. And this is a program we at College Forward have run for as long as I've been here, so 12, 13 years at this point. Also through the Chamber of Commerce and AISD and a number of the surrounding school districts, there's also a summer transition program where they pair advisors with students, again, just through the summer, roughly about mid-June to late July, to handle a lot of the transitional questions that occur during that time. So finalizing housing, accepting financial aid packages, talking through getting transcripts, things like that. All this culminated and really kind of came to a head during the pandemic last year in March, during a senior survey that was sent out to students across the region. One of the questions was, do you have concerns about going to college? I think this is my terms, not actually what was on the survey. And over 1,000 students responded to the survey from just AISD saying that my college plans are changing potentially, and I have not been able to be in contact with someone from the school district. So a number of folks from the school district, from AISD, Pflugerville ISD, I believe reached out to E3 Alliance, ACAN, and kind of the community at large to ask for additional support and help during this time. It was at this time that College Forward, as a member of ACAN, was brought in, and we actually offered our services to kind of the initiative as we were kind of formulating that in the early months of the summer. Ultimately, College Forward, our college summer transition coaches, were divided out and paired up, not paired up with, but were assigned a cohort of those, a subset of those students in that 1,000 students from both AISD and Pflugerville ISD. And our coaches worked with a group of about 40 of those students to transition to college. And so we were able to have access to One Logos, which is the college advising system that the different districts use. So we were able to pick up where students were in their journeys in terms of applying for college, applying for financial aid, and basically we're there not only to proactively outreach, just make outreach to students to see and check in and see where they are in the process. But the districts also pushed out reminders close to every week about important milestones and deadlines that were coming up over the course of the summer. And our coaches were also the folks that were beginning to respond to those messages as they came in. And that engagement lasted up until the beginning of August. And at that point, we ended the partnership, and we're actually looking, and already just this week, started kind of a new cohort. And so we've continued the partnership. On the one hand, because the pandemic still exists and we're still in the middle of it. On the other hand, I think this was a very incredibly intriguing partnership, and I think we're all kind of fascinated around the kind of the community of support built around these students as they transition to college, and they don't always have an institution that they might be assigned to during this time.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, I think the thing that I heard consistently, and it's not an assumption, it's what we heard in deliberative dialogues that Isaac led a few years back, and then Scott said in a survey, is that what we heard from the students is the mentorship and how key that is. And each of these kind of have that support role that they're providing students, right? They're not only sharing where the resources are, but they're kind of, like Ashley said, the wizard leading them to the resources, bringing the resources to them. And I think that's really impactful. I'm going to kind of skip ahead on our questions, but Scott, if you wouldn't mind just kind of continue on, what are some outcomes or highlights of the impact of the work that you're seeing or hearing from students based on what you're doing?
Yeah, and so just in terms of some college enrollment outcomes, we are actually still waiting on those back from the Ray Marshall Center in terms of whether or not students matriculated and kind of persist into the second year. But we have all of our kind of output data. We sent, of those 1,200 students we ended up serving, every one of those students was sent a message once a week. Our coaches also sent an additional 1,670 messages during this period. So we'll call that proactive outreach. And so it's, you know, the coach seeing that a student didn't submit an application yet and they were following up. Each student over the summer got an average of about three messages per student of that 1,600. And actually the overall response rate was 84%, which is incredible by all standards at College Forward. We have about 40% of our students respond to our messages for students enrolled in our program. So to see that 84% of the students that are new to College Forward responded to messages is incredible. And I think that really speaks volumes to students are identifying a need. Hey, I'm changing my plans about college and I don't have anyone to talk to. And when we're actually addressing that need, they are responsive. And I think that's probably a really important takeaway for us. And again, the Ray Marshall Center is doing kind of the outcomes data at large in terms of college matriculation and spring persistence. So we're actually waiting on that data from them at this time.
Wonderful. What about Ashley, you and the work that you're doing? What kind of impact are you seeing?
Well, I think kind of one of the biggest ones that we've had was making the transition from E3 Alliance serving as the administrator of this grant to the Hispanic Scholarship Consortium, we were able to take on some of the administrative costs. You know, it's natural for a scholarship organization to award grants to students and send checks. It's a normal business process within our organization, whereas, you know, E3 was kind of like, wait, this is not a normal activity of ours. Like, we're the data, we're the numbers folks. So I think that was really powerful for that transition to happen. When that happened, we moved the application from a paper application to an online application, which also sped up the process quite a bit for students. So we're able to award students a scholarship or a grant in as little as 3 days. So it's really, you know, timely support at a, you know, at a much, when a student is in crisis, when they're experiencing an emergency. In particular, we've awarded almost $70,000 since the beginning of the pandemic. And we've seen a lot of those requests from students who, you know, had hours cut at their jobs, or, you know, they themselves were sick or a family member was sick and they weren't able to work, and we're now struggling to, you know, take on, you know, these additional expenses that they or their families were seeing. And then even more so, we've awarded over $20,000 since the winter storms. And again, you know, those hit all of us, you know, everyone here in Central Texas hard, but in particular with our students and the students that that are supported through ACAN, it hit them even harder. So being able to put $20,000 back into the community and really help these folks, you know, get through the winter storms and pull themselves out has been really powerful.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, I know, like you said, everyone was hit hard, but when you put in the perspective that you're a student and you're struggling for so many other reasons and just trying to hopefully maintain and stay. So thank you for sharing that. Isaac, I'm going to shift questions with you right now. So why will this work matter when we talk about Make It movement for all students, but in particular for low-income households, Black and Latinx students?
Sure. And I'm going to put in the chat our website, which we have a landing page right now that is live. So you can go to makeitmovement.com, sign your students up to receive updates via email. The full site will be in function August. So August 1st. Right now, that's a landing page so we can start, you know, connecting with our partners. The full site in August, and then next spring into summer, ACC will have the actual physical Make It Center, which is going to be just state-of-the-art, innovative, incredible. So to your question, Jen, this will be a function of an equitable kind of approach to college access, enrollment, persistence, et cetera, because the physical center itself at ACC, and this is separate from the Make It movement. The Make It movement is the kind of overall branding vision kind of nonprofit side of things. ACC will own and host and construct and facilitate this Make It Center. Imagine, you know, your favorite, art museum or kids kind of innovative, interactive museum where you can go in and touch stuff and you're doing simulations and, you know, the thinkery kind of situation where ACC is going to in fact construct this center where students, low-income students can go over to ACC. We want it to be, they want it to be. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, and I don't want to get out of school a little bit here, but thinking in terms of access to exploration, career exploration via a community college center that is open to the public. It's open to families. It's open to counselors and schools, and the students who want to come down with their +1 or with their friends, you know, and just start engaging with the innovative kind of interactive technologies to explore, you know, what their potential career possibilities could be. But I think that the Make It movement as a kind of broad, you know, wide-reaching marketing and communications approach, we want the Black and Latinx students to see themselves in the branding, in the commercials, in the documents, as we want them to become the brand ambassadors, because in fact they see, dang it, I did in fact make it out of high school and into this program, and I can see how this guy is making $80,000 doing this trade, what's considered a trade, and I'm on my way to doing that, you know. So we want them to see themselves, we want them to become the brand ambassadors, but also to have that direct access to the physical space. And then once the full website is up and running in August, and then the wide reaching marketing is in full swing, it'll just be ever pervasive. They'll feel it and see it everywhere, to the point where it'll be essentially a kind of, what we're looking to create is a make it index in the data we're capturing, so that we can see what is a make it student, who is a make it student after 2 or 3 years of doing this. And we can see exactly how to tailor our outreach and the corresponding services to them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I see that we only have a couple of minutes left. So, just really thinking about at the onset when I shared, that we look at data to gain knowledge, to drive action. And so what I hope you hear from these 3 guest panelists is that's exactly what they did, right? They understood, they really spent time understanding the data, not just the quantitative data, but really understanding the qualitative data. I mean, I think it's still sticking with me what Ashley said, that a lot of our students that were put on holds, it was because of $500 or less. And like she said, for some of us, it's not a lot of money, but for so many that is. And to think that a student could just have a $300 bill out there that's preventing them from enrolling in that next course or enrolling in that next semester. And we have an organization that is focused on helping students with that is so powerful. And so these are perfect examples of that action, right? And so when I asked you that essential question earlier, before we leave our breakout, I just want to, really encourage you to think about, and I know you're all doing powerful things. I would love to hear from each one of you of the work that you're doing and how it's impacting our students, but really just think about what can you do to accelerate change using an inclusive approach? Really thinking about the data that we shared. Somebody shared earlier, this isn't new. Our male students have been left behind for a long time, especially our Black males. And so what are we doing differently? How are we being more inclusive in our approach? And what data and what's the narrative that we're creating through that data to really understand how do we change the system to improve student outcomes? So I can't thank you enough for joining us today. All of the resources, the links to these different organizations will be on that Blueprint Summit landing page that Susan keeps mentioning. The slide deck will be there as well, and we'll be sending it out in a follow-up email as well as the recording to this. But I do encourage you to go to the Make It Movement landing page because there's an incredible video that really highlights some of the work that they're wanting to focus on and communicate with students. So please join us back in the main room where we have an incredibly closing speaker, Dr. Ben, that I think is going to tie all of this conversation together. Thank you all so much.